course, we start with standing rigging. That's the black lines running. We get those in place. Now you've got your mast pretty well lined up. Then we put the shrouds on the side, and the shrouds will usually give us the stability this way. So now you've got your basic anchoring in. Now, one of the things they don't tell you in the book is there's a couple of more shrouds that go farther up to the top. Don't put those in, because when you stick the rigging, they're going to be in the way. They can be put in afterwards. When the rigging is, it doesn't make any difference. It'll still work the same. The other thing we caution is all the pins in here are belaying pins, and they really have to be anchored to some place in the ship. Now, you guys got to think a little bit. If you think that sailors were not very smart in those days, somebody had to be smart. I'm going to tell you, there's on the sails on here, just the lines. Now I'm going to refer to them as lines or ropes. They're really just threads. But the yard arms, the ones going across, there's actually the first thing you do, the first thing that's going to be attached is the yard arms to the ship. And they will be held elevated up and down. And on this ship, there's actually 39 ropes that go to belaying pins down in the bottom portion. So now you've located the height of your yards. But on all the yards that I make, and what I'm going to do at this point is I'm not trying to show you what to do, how to do, but these are yards that I turn up on the lathe, and they're boxwood. And if it isn't boxwood, you're not going to be able to get the detail. Now, since I'm not going to be, I can pass these along, but what I'm pointing out is what they never show you in a book is put another loop down below, because if you're going to rig these things to get them located up and down, you have to hold them down. They're not heavy enough. So you can position them that way. So they never tell you add the fake rope in the bottom, but I put that on. Now, since I won't be building any more square riggers, I've built in 11 years 15 ships, 4 square riggers. I can't do better than this, so I'm not going to do any more square riggers. I'll do other kinds. But I will still turn yards for anybody that doesn't have a lathe. And I have the special equipment to drill the little holes and all the other stuff, because I still like to do some machine work. And that was one of the fun things. I'll pass that around. So now, continuing, now I have your yards. Your first thing is you've got your yards, and the yards have to be completed enough that you put all the loops in and stuff. And then what I do on the yards, I used to tie strings for the foot loops. I just put a wire in there now with a loop. Looks better, and they're straight. And you can bend them if you bend them. So a couple of things that they don't really show you in the books. So now you've got your yards positioned. The next thing that you need to do is you're going to have to develop a way that these yards can be turned. That means that each yard is going to have 2 more lines going to it to a pulley back down to the next mast, and they again are secured in the middle of the ship. So now you have 3, you have the yard held up, and now you have the twist control on it. And now the other part is, before you put those yards on, if it's a sail ship, you fasten all the sails to the yard before you put it on. But do not tie them to the bottom of the yard, because you got to lift them up to work in underneath there once in a while. So the very last thing you're going to do is tie the sail. The very last thing you do is tie the sail to the bottom yard, because you have to be able to get at it. One of the things that becomes the most difficult is trying to keep yourself open enough that you can get the pieces in where you got to go. So now, when you've got if you're putting sails on, now I say, should you put sails on a ship or should you not put sails on a ship? I found that warships look good without sails. Sailing ships should have sails on. It just dawned on me while I was building this. This looks a lot better with sails than it does without sails. But the warships really do look better if you don't put the sails on, because you see more of the guns and things. So the precaution I was talking about was things you need to do before you go too far down the line, and that's make sure that your belaying pins have large enough holes in them that some of those you're not going to be able to do this fancy looper out tight because you simply won't get in. Leave it big enough that you can drop the line through it and then drop the pin in on top of it. You can always pull it and tug it in, and at least that way you can reach in with a little tweezer with the guard and drop it in and pull it back. If you think that you can always get that wound around, you can't. You just go crazy trying to wind it on. The books always make that look easy and they'll do this tiny thing, but for me it never worked out that way. So what I'm saying now is, if you're getting to this point, just to give you some idea of how you have to keep track of lines, another mistake that's made in building these ships is when you put your mast together, you have the platforms. Now you have your shrouds coming up there, they go through an opening in the platform and get tied up on top. Most ships do not leave enough space because if you take time to look, there's a lot of lines that have to run down through that same area. Make sure that that opening is big, because when you get done rigging, it ain't going to be big enough. And you got to be able to, the worst thing you can do is drop a line down and have it cross over the other one when you pull it down, because when you tighten it, it'll show. It'll show, it'll bring that other one around. And Will, I think you can attest to some of that stuff. Trying to keep those lines straight is really part of the trick there of making them look good.
Well, the thing that rigging a model ship that's really a problem is that if you use the material that comes with the kit, it's not to scale. So if you figure like this is 3/16 scale, they give you a piece of line that's 10 thousandths thick. That in reality is a 1-inch diameter rope.
Yeah, right.
It wasn't that big on the ship.
How do you scale your rope?
Well, I make my own.
Okay, but how do you?
To answer your question on scaling the rope, you can't. Because it's simply impossible to scale a rope down, and the smaller scales you go on the ship, and I'm going to say right now, the smaller scale you build, the harder it is to build, because you can't, things he's talking about, the block and tackles are way too big, but you can't get them down small enough to make them. So that's why I always tried to stick with the larger size, because even at that, when I get the block and tackles, maybe they look somewhat right, but he's exactly right. These ropes would be like 1-inch ropes, there's no way in the world. But continuing on with the amount of ropes that are going to be required, the last thing that you do is you really tie the sail down, but before that, each one of these sails has 4 lines running down, going up through a pulley into the center and then back down to be tied to the side. I found that these are your ropes. This actually, on this model, they actually work that way. I've got all the block and tackles in. So there's 4 ropes on each sail, and if you pull the proper rope down that, you'll pull the sail back up. And then the other thing is, the other thing that has to be adjusted on some ships, the bottom main yards are anchored permanently, but on most of them, the upper ones are not, so they can also be moved up and down. Another set of lines going down. So by the time you get these lines in, you want to have these lines so that you can get them kind of halfway secured to the side, and that's what I'm talking about, making the hole big enough. I'll give you some idea of how many lines, ropes there were. On the yards, on just the yards, there were 39 coming off the yards that had to be tied down. Just to turn the control, to twist them, took another 32 lines that had ends on. And then the forward jib sails, it took another 12 lines anchored to adjust those. And then the center jib and stern sail, another 8 back there. And then by the time you got to what I call the lift sails, or in other words, what you floor them up, there were another 64 lines coming down. So in this ship, there's 155 lines going down to different locations that have to be secured to belaying pins. There is the problem in building this is you have to be very careful that you do not put outer lines on that really are going to just be in the way. So the trick is to try and develop a technique where you keep as much open as possible, but yet still be able to, you can see to add these ones in glass back here is not a big deal, but if they're in there and you're trying to get stuff in, it becomes very difficult. So I learned a lot. Up until now, I really never, and I don't know if I've even got it right, but I think I'm 90% right. I never really understood how many lines were used to what, because till I put actually sails on, I just put fake lines, and I didn't really know where they went. They were just lines running up there. So somebody on that ship who had to know, if the captain says mainsail, top gallant sail, rotate 15 degrees starboard, you got to know which two ropes to unhook. You don't want to see this one up here moving. So, and I don't know how to command wind on this ship, be interested, but somebody had to know now somebody told me once that when the sailors were brought on board, they were only indoctrinated in certain areas of the ship. That might have been the way they could have probably done it, because there's no way that you're going to just remember. Now remember, that sail's 100 and some feet up there, and you're loosening a rope. You don't want one of your yards come dropping down. Captain's going to be pissed. Oh no, we can't be doing that. So I think what I've learned on this was I hesitated, should I do sails or not? And then I started, and then I got the jib sails on, and I was still hesitating. There's so many things that didn't look right on them. They had wrinkles in there. No, I'll keep going. And then the more I kept going, the more enthused I got about, okay, let's put the rest of the sails on. And it turned out to be interesting, but it took months and months of rigging.
Duane,
And yeah.
I want to mention one thing. Back to where you're talking about dropping the line down to the belaying pin hole and not anchoring it, then just put the pin back in it.
Yeah.
Then, after you're done, pull that line down, then you stop and you follow the line all the way up back to the
And
source and make sure it's not crossing the line.
And sometimes they are, and then you say, should I pull it out and redo it?
That's right.
And you will. You will. You'll look at it for a while, and you will pull that line out, even though you've worked your buns off getting it in there, and you see it's twisted around one line, you will pull that line out.
And every time you look at the model, that's the first thing you'll see.
Yeah, because that's exactly what you're looking at. So
that's another reason for not securing it.
that's exactly right. Now, I'll talk a little bit about how to secure lines. Every block and tackle that I use, I just usually use a half hitch or something that's not a big load. I will actually put a little bit of fast stitch on, which actually doesn't get too hard, but it keeps it from unrolling. So every single line on here that has a rope tied has got to have a fast stitch on, so they never open up, because that's kind of a bad thing. Now the other thing is, when you stroke the blocks, most people make the mistake of putting too heavy a wire around the block, because we're going back to scale. That's like trying to put a 3/4 inch piece around a. So what I do, believe it or not, the real small ones only have a 12 thousandths wire going around. And then you can, and if you get to that point where you want to stroke blocks, spend some time with me. I've learned a lot of tricks on how to do it, an easy way to do it. But the reason I do it is twofold. If you use on light lines or lights, if you ever hit it with your arm or something, it'll open up. You don't break it. So those are your really, in a model itself, the model will never let loose, but you will, your biggest enemy is going to be yourself trying to destroy this, because you've got a visor on, and now I've got macular degeneration. I don't see good out of one eye, and where I'm trying to put something that's not there, it gets a little frustrating. But in this particular case, a big mistake is trying to stroke those with too heavy a wire. So some of that stuff, again, after you do a few of these, you say, hey, I'm glad that it wasn't too tight because it didn't break anything. So that's kind of now, when we get back to, you know, the yards themselves and where they are, if you're building a ship like this, a square rigger, this is the only one I put sails on. I put a bunch of lines on. I know now when I look at that ship, they're not cracked. Because I didn't know where they went. I had no way. If you don't have one that has a sail on, you don't know that that line was supposed to carry part of that sail, or that another line was supposed to pull it up and down. So I learned a lot on this. It was very, very interesting. But so I'm going to encourage you guys that don't shy away from doing sails on the ship. It's not that difficult. And when you get to actual sail making, we have ways that we can just glue the thread in and stuff. That I'm glad I did it. I debated, and I'm glad I did it this way. But I'm also glad that I built the other ones. Some of you I'll show you later on, where they're warships and they're real good. So I just thought, that I wanted to talk a little bit. Does anybody have any questions?
No, I have a question.
Wait, no.
Did the sail material that you got with this kit, was it already that color?
Yeah, this was Lantine, this ship, Lantine, Artesian, or however they say that, the sails were provided, but they needed a lot of work. Some of them had to go up a little area, but I was able to use them all. I was able to iron them all out. I found out which ones to go to where. And this sail, I learned one thing, is very light. It's almost like the silky material. I'm learning now that the lighter the sail material is, the better it is to get the sail to do it. It has some fakey wrinkles in there, but it looks, you know, okay. It looks like it might be wind blowing on it. It's just a bad fit is what it is.
Yeah.
So in this particular case, these were provided. So what I had to do was I had to attach them. Now another trick is when you sew a sail to a yard arm, you want to continuously go through. And what I do is I punch a hole and then I use a needle that doesn't, the blunt end needle, and I thread them around. Make your length of rope at least 3 times longer than the yard, and you'll be able to wrap around. Otherwise, you get 3/4 done. And, oh man, do I unwrap this all there? Or do I just tie a knot and then continue on? So about 3 times longer. You use. The other thing is when you start rigging, the worst thing you're going to have is you're going to feel, I want to save thread. I want to save thread. And then you usually end up, and I'll bet you everybody in here that's done this, you're an inch too short of getting it on the belaying pin. Should have left a little bit more on there. And then sometimes you can fake it in and tie one that nobody sees. There's a couple in there like that. And just because I was too tight to lay out enough thread, you know, you say, I gotta save thread, gotta save thread. It's just the stupid thing you fight with yourself on. But always make sure you've got enough thread.
Did the sails come with seams?
Pardon me?
Did the sails come with seams?
These were pre-sewn, yeah. These were pre-sewn. They did, like I say, they didn't look this good, but they're okay. I cleaned them up a little bit, used some glue in some areas. They had some big ends hanging out. I made them work. So in this particular case, and the sail is that color, but it's a very thin sail, and that worked out pretty good. And then rather than trying to create the artificial bow in here, I found that if you just tuck them up a little bit like this, they look kind of like they're not dead flat.
What do you think about furling the lower sails to show more deck?
I do. That's exactly what these are, the lower ones. They are pulled up. They're and say if it was really sailing, they'd be letting them out a little bit more. So they are actually pulled up a little bit just for that. But also to make them fakey look, you don't have the bow in them. Things like that. Any other questions?
What's the scale?
This would have been a 3/16 scale roughly.
3/16?
Yeah, but the Europeans do it a little bit different. But yeah, all in all, it's probably. I thought I built in some of the guys that haven't seen some of the other ones. I thought they were good, but this is my favorite build. I feel like I finally got there. So
Well, what made this so what good was the fittings.
Yeah.
The fittings are just phenomenal.
Yeah, they sell a really good kit, but I'm going to later on in the show and tell I'm going to show you something that's going to make you laugh. But any more questions? I just wanted to talk a little bit about the fear of putting sails on a ship, and don't do that. I made a mistake. I should have got over that a long time ago. Yeah.
So on your yards, do you make all the eyelets or those are purchased?
I make all the eyelets. I know, and here again, I've got a way of making small eyelets that I can show. The other thing is, where is that board going around over here? You notice that on the yards that have the raised, that have to have the extenders out here, stud sail, boom. What I do, I really cheat. In the book it says, take a wire, solder a tube on. I don't solder. I never solder. I can't stand solder. So what I do is I take a 30 thousandths wire, then in the lathe, that's why I say I can build these for you quite fast, because I'm tooling to build 20, 30 thousandths holes in the end of these. I put a 30 thousandths hole in there, I bend the wire, put a loop around it, and another loop around it, and by the time you paint it black, nobody's going to know the difference. Modeling is a bit of fakery. It's, I should have. I always wanted to work in Hollywood. I probably should have done that. But there is a certain amount. Now the other thing that you probably noticed is these are all tapered. Guess what? I don't file those. I machine those. I'm like a CNC machine. I set up once I know my settings of a diameter, I write those dial settings down on the lathe, and I space it if it's 5/8 of an inch spacing, and I've got 10 thousandths of taper in there. I know that reading, so when I get there, I just automatically turn it and I CNC it with myself. So all of these have never been tapered with a file of the actual machine. That's why I'm not advertising for work, but guys, if you need some yards made, I've got something to turn. Yeah. Any other questions?
I might make one statement here. For those of you who are
Neophytes.
wanting to get into the business of this, he is probably the closest, he denies this, but he's probably the closest perfectionist when it comes to building that we have in the group, at least. But he also produces magnificent work. But it isn't necessary sometimes to do as much detailing as he tried to do.
No.
It's going to take the fun out of it for you, don't do it.
I'm glad you mentioned that, because I was a tool maker all my life before I owned my own companies. We did highly close tolerance precision machining. There's something wrong if I can't do that kind of work. That's what I did all my life.
Yeah.
So the model, I'm glad you mentioned that, Tom, because your model, the only person you satisfy is yourself.
Right.
It only has to look, because guess what? Most of the people looking at this don't even know what they're looking at. Oh, you got a ship there. Oh, that's a nice looking ship. I mean, that's about as much as you're ever going to get. There's nobody other than the people in this room that really appreciate what is in a ship. So you're the one that has to determine how far you want to go and how far. We have experienced people here to help with ideas on how we do it and some of the shortcuts. Shortcuts are good to know. And they never put shortcuts in those books. I've never seen any. So you got to talk to the old cheaters to find out about the shortcuts.
What's your smallest block up there?
They're about 3/32.
Those are tough to come by. I've got about 100 of them left. So
Yeah.
if anybody needs it.
Yeah, they're tough to show up too, but I got a way of doing that that's pretty easy. I showed Jim how to do it the other day. Okay, any other questions before we move on?
I'll make a comment. There are 3 clubs around Chicago, one of which in the letter that I sent out is Midwest Modeling Club. And Kurt Van Dam, who's the president of the Nautical Research Guild, and is in that. And if you go to that site, which I had included, and you go to the individual names, there is a photo gallery, and you click the individuals, they're great models, and they put together every year in Manitowoc Maritime Museum in Manitowoc, Wisconsin, ship modeling show contest, both beginner, intermediate, and advanced, and they give prizes. The Denver group typically sends 3 to 4 people. It's a shame that he can't present this because he'd be a gold medal winner at the Manitowoc show.
I probably reckon getting it there. I probably reckon getting it there.
If you could.
Well, later on, when I get to the DV, I want to show you guys, I'll show you how I do transport ships. I did do it, a transport. But thank you for the compliment, but it's what guys, I mean, some of us work at this harder, some of us not so hard. It's my way of relaxing. And everybody should just work at the pace, and fortunately I have people in the house that do the other part of the work and allow me to do this, which I appreciate too. You have to have a little.
Haven't seen much TV lately, have
I do it in the evening. We always watch TV. I don't. Any other questions? Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is your copper bottom, is that done in individual
Yeah, it's about
pieces?
2,000 per minute. They're individuals. Yeah. Or to put it in more other terms, probably what, $200 worth, so $250.
They're I think $16 a pack, and
Yeah.
it's 50 in a pack.
But you know, there are different ones. There's different copper. If you really are good, you can use a copper tape to do it. I tried it. I can't. It's a sloppy job. I just can't do that. So I know, but I buy these from. These are bought and I glue them on.
I use the copper tape and I run it, make 6 of them at a time.
Yeah. Yeah, and sometime if you get to that, I mean, he does it that way. He'll show you how to do it that way. I'll show you how to spend a bunch of money doing it
See, I
this
do
way.
I copper tape,
Say
and
again?
I developed a punch.
Yeah.
I have a system, I make a punch with nails, and I take the tape and I start at the end. I've got one of those presses, that small press from the, I just pull it in. That stops, how to pull it, and
Yeah.
when I
So-
get a whole bunch at the end, I take the scissors
Yeah.
and cut them off.
Now, the other thing that I did on some of my earlier ships, I tried to simulate cross-lapping them. Not a good idea because in a scaled ship like this, so what I do, I butt them all, and they look just as good. But in reality, they should have been overlapped. And I did it on one of my ships, the first one, and I thought, no, I was trimming ends off it. So this is just a lap. But the guys that are good with the tape, you can learn from them. I just couldn't do it. I just gave up on it. Everything was wrinkled. It just got me frustrated. So I just always spend the money and just do it this way. Okay. Anyway, the idea, what I'm trying to say is, if you get into it, if you need some help in any of the machining or anything like that, we're here to help you on that. I don't mind doing that. Questions, okay. Let's move on to show and tell.